And so SSWR-GADE decided that it would be great to bring this to a bigger audience. And we did this well before we were doing all of these Zoom webinars all the time. And there was a group of us who got together. It was Laura Abrams from UCLA, Jen Bellamy at Denver, Liz Apparaccio from University of Maryland, and Mo-Yi Lee at Ohio State. And we represent the different organizations and other organizations. And we got together to start talking about this. And when we decided to do these in a webinar format for this summer, we did this before COVID-19 and had affected, or we might say decimated, the job market. We'll try to give you some more positive views after this. But when we actually started meeting to discuss what these would look like, we thought pretty quickly that doing a standard job market overview in this time of uncertainty for 2021 wouldn't be helpful or fair to doctoral students, and that might be more helpful to talk about alternative tracks to a research one or tenure track position. And that's what our first webinar was on July 30th. And this talk, which is making a difference, alternative positions beyond the tenure track, which would both be great topics anyways, but we decided that this would be especially relevant right now where people are a little worried about what's going on. And as a doctoral program director myself, I'm very worried for our doctoral students because it is such an uncertain time. So Laura Abrams and I, who are former colleagues, are the host for this session today. Just a little brief background about me. I am a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work. I'm one of those doctoral program directors who never leaves. So I have been the doctoral program there for, I think I'm going on my 14th year there. I'm the former president of GADE, for GADE for a couple of years, not too long ago. I was the former secretary of SSWR, and I was one of the original members of the Research Development and Capacity Committee of SSWR as well. So I've been really interested and committed to doctoral education and helping doctoral students. And one of my most important, I think one of my most important functions as a doctoral program director is helping students figure out what's the best job for them and trying to figure out how they can get to where they want to go. And so that's sort of, I think that ethos surrounds all of this today, is we want people to figure out the best way to get to where they want to go in the context. And I'll let Laura introduce herself next.
Hi there, my name is Laura Abrams. I'm currently the chair of the Luskin School of Public Affairs Social Welfare Department and also a professor. I did once work at the University of Minnesota way back when, and Liz was on my hiring committee, if I recall. I got involved in this effort. I've also been, I was also a member of GADE for 6 years and the vice chair of GADE. I was also involved with SSWR. I'm no longer on the board of either organization, but I wanted to work on this project because I feel that it's very important right now that we get the word out to all the PhD students about the path forward, especially during COVID-19, and also how wonderful careers can be, multiple types of careers with a PhD. So with that, and our panelists will introduce ourselves in a bit. Two of my former doctoral students are on the panel who are now having wonderful careers outside the tenure track. So, you know, when we look, even in the absence of COVID-19, when doctoral programs look and see what the array of graduates are doing, it is very diverse. So I think it's important that we represent all the types of pathways that are available. And I also have a passion for mentoring and teaching doctoral education. So welcome. We're really glad you're here. And I know that the panelists are going to give some great advice and perspective. Thank you.
Okay, so some housekeeping before we get going. We are recording this, so fix my hair. We just want you to know that we are recording this, and chats are recorded as well. We encourage everybody except the panelists to turn off their video and use the chat function to speak to us and remain on mute. So if everybody could mute themselves, then we won't get any background noise. You can also change your name. If you don't already know this from all these Zoom meetings, you can change your name by hovering on the dots on the right-hand corner of your picture and clicking the 3 dots. I should probably do this to capitalize Lightfoot in my name, but I'll try to do this while we're talking. And you can ask questions during chat. We don't know if the speakers will be able to get to all of these questions, and we will hold most of the questions for the end. And I know we're going to have all sorts of lively questions. We've got 4 panelists who are all doing really cool things. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. And you can go on to the next slide where we will introduce our panelists. I'm not going to introduce them for you because they can introduce themselves, and I think that will be part of their talk. Laura and I are lucky that we work with so many great people, because 2 of these are Laura's former students and the other 2 are University of Minnesota graduates. So we're both really excited about our former students doing really interesting jobs. So use the chat function to ask questions. Laura's going to be organizing the questions, and we'll feed them to folks as they go on. The panelists won't be looking at the chat directly. And we're going to go in the order that is on the screen. So we will start off with Kelly Nye-Lengerman, and then follow with Diane Terry, Matthew Mizel, and Michael Lee, and do your questions as we go. They'll each be speaking for 10 to 12 minutes or so. And if they keep going on too long, we might jump in a little bit, but I think it'll be perfect. So we'll turn it over to Kelly first, Dr. Nye-Lengerman, who will talk about how she ended up as the director of the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire. On to you, Kelly.
Hi, thank you for the very good. Can folks hear me okay? Can you give me a thumbs up, Liz, if you can hear me? Yes. All right. Very good. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Nye-Lengerman, and I am the director of the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire. And that is a brand new role for me within the last 2 months. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey on how I got there. But I am a graduate of the University of Minnesota School of Social Work, both for my MSW and my PhD. And so my lovely colleagues, Liz and Michael, I'm very happy to see them today. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to be sharing a little bit about today is my journey in the non-tenure track. And the slide that I'm showing you today is one that I actually use quite a bit. I do work in a university setting, so there are many formalities that we all know and are aware of in our graduate and PhD education. That said is, oftentimes when I talk about the work that I do, or I talk about the things that our centers work on, both in New Hampshire and at the University of Minnesota, where I was from, I do lots of different kinds of things. And so while I do identify primarily as a researcher, my background is in social work, as you all know. That's what brought me here today. But my primary area of focus is disability policy and services. And so the center that I work at the University of New Hampshire is focused on that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and how that fits in the university context. And while it is not the traditional tenure track pathway, there are many research opportunities and many PhDs that we employ. One of the great things that I enjoy about my particular pathway is that it's deeply connected to the years of direct service that I did prior to coming to a higher education setting. And I'm guessing for many of you who are on the call today, you spent a number of years in direct practice or still doing direct practice in some form or another, whether that's working with individuals or families or communities. And so I've been able to, I feel like, leverage both that direct practice experience and that graduate education with a PhD into a pathway that looks different, but that's pretty exciting. I also always share that my personal motto, because nice matters, and you'll see that again a little bit later. Next slide, please. So what you see here is the smaller green mint colored dots there indicate the titles of the jobs that I had, and the larger open dark green circles are those punctuated points of higher education. So I had an undergraduate degree in social work and did a number of years of direct service work, came back to school again at the University of Minnesota and did my MSW and did a couple more years of direct practice work. And then in my time working as an employee of the University of Minnesota, had the opportunity to pursue a PhD, even though I was already working in the higher ed space, which really provided me that additional trajectory or some additional career options that maybe I won't say maybe, I never necessarily envisioned for myself. And so I don't know for any of you today where you sit, if you look back at your career the last 5, 10, or 20 years ago, if you would have said, I'm going to be a graduate of a PhD program someday, what will my career look like? I never necessarily had that per se, but when I sort of lay it out, it's sort of these experiences of saying access to education, different types of jobs, access to education, different types of jobs. And really the PhD provided me with a variety of different kinds of choices, again, beyond just teaching in a higher ed setting. Next slide, please. The place where I work today is called the Institute on Disability, and it's an organization that was formed in 1987, and it is the designated UCED for the state of New Hampshire, and UCED stands for University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. We don't use developmental disabilities at our UCED, we just use University Center for Excellence in Disabilities, so we have one less D. But what that UCED network is a part of a national network, or a federal stool, if you will, of 3 federal programs that are held up through the Developmental Disabilities Act. So every state in the United States has a University Center for Excellence in Disability. Every state also has a Developmental Disabilities Council. And every state also has a P&A, or a Protection and Advocacy Organization. So for example, in Minnesota, it's the Disability Law Center. In New Hampshire, it's the Disability Rights Center. And so each state has a UCED, a DD Council, and a P&A. And so oftentimes people don't recognize that there are some pathways in both by qualifications and training in UCEDs and P&As around the country. So this is sort of an easier map to kind of understand that. So I'm at the IOD, or the Institute on Disability in New Hampshire. Next slide, please. So what a UCED is, again, as I mentioned, it's a University Center for Excellence in Disability, and we have a long and storied history about how we came into existence under the Developmental Disabilities Act, which is fascinating. If you're interested in that, I'm not going to talk about that today, but the core functions by legislation are interdisciplinary training, research and evaluation, community service, and information information dissemination. Those are the core functions. That is what we are designed to do. So it's really the best of all of the things that we've learned across our PhD programs. It's teaching and training. It's doing research and evaluation. It's doing direct practice services. It's sharing that information and disseminating that in both academic ways through peer-reviewed publications or federal publications or state publications, but it's also through creative ways of how do we share the findings of our research and our service. So this is really at the core what we do every day. At the Institute on Disability, we have around 100 employees at all different levels, focusing on all different types of topics. And the other really interesting thing and exciting thing about UCEDs in particular is that while we cover disability services very broadly, it's very dynamic in the sense of that there are things that we do that are focused on early childhood and early learning and supporting families. There are things that we do that look at research for older adults who are exiting the workforce, either leaving the workforce because of a disability or are leaving the workforce because they've worked for many years and maybe want a different pathway post-retirement. And so we do a wide variety of work in this particular area. Next slide, please. So the slide that I have up here, this is one of our vision statements. And what you see for the visual here on the right side of the page is a copy of our scholarly report. It's basically our center's CV, if you will. And so if you pick that up, you would be able to see all of the peer-reviewed publications that our staff and employees have done. You'd be able to see the reports, the grants that we have secured over the course of a year. So it's a really nice companion piece to the work that we do. And one of the things that's really important about this document and about the portfolio of work that we do is that because we are in a university setting, we get to do some of the great and exciting things that we do in that academic setting in terms of we do have responsibilities for publications and technical reports, as well as direct service and technical assistance to state and federal agencies around the country. And so this is really a great opportunity to sort of put everything together. So there's a link to our center that I included in my note, but if you go on to our link at the iod.unh.edu, you'll be able to see that report. Our 2021 should be out actually any day now. Next slide, please. So for me, the benefits of the alternative path were a couple. Well, there's many, but for me personally, one of the things, the post-PhD that I've really been able to do both at my center previously at the University of Minnesota, as well as at the Institute on Disability, is being engaged and involved in the decision making. Many times on a tenure track pathway, that's quite, I would say maybe more prescriptive, and it takes a longer space and time to be able to get into some of those decision-making circles. And in this UCED setting, in this research setting within a university, there are much clearer pathways to be involved in kind of decision-making and planning. As you saw in the core functions of a UCED, I talked about community services being one of our core activities. We have a direct impact on what services and supports look like for individuals and families with disabilities, both in our state and around the United States. And that is incredible. And for me personally, that's been an incredible benefit of the work that I do, is that we do research, but then we also do service. And many times we integrate our service and our research together to provide even better service. And we get to see what that looks like for everyday people. And that's really important to me. Being outside of the tenure track, I have felt like I've had a bit more choice and control and flexibility. We took some questions early on about folks are like, well, what does the work-life balance look like? You know, how does hiring look? Things like that. Certainly in the center that I came from in Minnesota, as well as where I am at currently, we really work hard to try to balance both that choice and control for people to have both over their careers and their home and work lives. So that's been a positive for me. It's also allowed me personally and professionally to stay somewhat above the fray of some of the university politics. I won't say that it's eliminated it, and it's certainly not now in my newer job as a director, but some of the things that you can kind of get mired down in university or academic politics, I have not had to experience that as directly. And so I certainly see that as a benefit. In addition, sometimes the salary and benefits can be, I would even say, different or better than working in an academic unit. And it really depends on the university you're at. It really depends on the center you're in. It really depends on the job title that you come in as. Again, we hire many individuals who have PhDs, and we do have a pay scale for experience. And so while you may not be in the traditional tenure track, you can have clinical faculty status and research faculty status, which are a little bit different than full professor status. Next slide, please. And I think this is my last one here. So for me, personal and professional experiences that really brought me a lot of fulfillment. Just in closing, be open to new experiences and new partners. Focus on the work at hand. I think Diane is going to talk a little bit about doing what you love and finding that purpose. Developing a tolerance for discomfort, I would say, is a key piece of advice that I give to any of our PhD students as well as the employees I work with, is that nothing is ever going to feel perfect or look perfect sometimes. Really seek and project humility, whether you're in an academic space or not. That humility in the work that we do, I have really found as a key ingredient to sort of happiness and success in my work. to also be able to enjoy the journey and recognize where you are today might not be anywhere near that where you are at in 5 years. And that's okay. And part of that journey is that learning process and being open to that and being able to embrace your own curiosity along the way, because we've been able to hold on to that as PhD students and explore many things. And as postgraduates, you can do those same kinds of things in a variety of different ways. Next slide, please. And I do know this is my last slide. I put a couple of links to different centers that I work with. So if you want to see where UCEDs are, click on that link for AUCD. If you're interested in some of the federal work or federal PhD jobs specifically related to disability or policy services, there's there. And a couple of research firm and contractors that I've regularly worked with over the last number of years, both in Minnesota and New Hampshire, are listed there. Although one of our colleagues on the webinar today is from RAND, and they have a number of tremendous opportunities as well. So thank you so much. I will look for questions here. I'm going to turn off my video, but I believe, Diane, you're up next.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Terry, and I think you can go ahead to the next slide. I'm a senior researcher at the Psychology Applied Research Center, and we are located at Loyola Marymount University. And we, as I mentioned, it's applied research, so it's all kind of direct action research and evaluation. And I'll share a little bit more about what that work entails. But first, I did want to share a little bit about the journey in getting there, because it was a journey. It was not straightforward. And I would love to have the opportunity to share that with you all today. So you can go to the next slide. This is a Wordle that I created just to kind of give a little bit of background about myself. It's interesting because I did not give any particular weight to these terms, but mom of 3 came up as the biggest, and that probably, it was unintentional, but it kind of makes sense because it is a big part of my identity as well as the other things on the screen. And it has really helped kind of guide a lot of my career choices and my overall career path. The other word that you'll kind of see big on the screen is having a social work identity. So, you know, as many of you or all of you, I'm an MSW, and I really do see social work as a calling. And even though I haven't, you know, been doing direct practice in that way, it's still very much, I consider myself a social worker who does research, and I've always wanted to do something that could kind of marry those two things. And so that's a little bit about me. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'll kind of have some guiding principles and different things that I think I've learned along the way with this career search, which is, and the first is really just following your interests. So I came into the PhD program not particularly interested in wanting an academic career. I was kind of, or wanting to go to that kind of tenure track position, and everyone was kind of like, that's okay, but don't tell people. But luckily I had an advisor who supported that, and even though she would let me know about kind of, you know, tenure track opportunities and would always encourage me to pursue it, she equally encouraged me to pursue things that I was interested in as well. And so I did have the benefit of having different RA positions in my doctoral program that kind of exposed me to working with different community-based organizations. I had the opportunity to work on an evaluation project and really just to pursue some things that were kind of maybe a little bit more off the beaten track. And so I appreciated that, though, because I think when you're not sure if you want to be in a tenure track position, you're not really sure what else there is or what it might look like. And so you're kind of figuring out, well, I may not want to do this, but what does something else even look like? And it's not always that straightforward. So for me, again, I think, you know, it was very important to me to try to figure out how do I merge all of my interests? How do I find something that directly speaks to, you know, my social work background, something that is policy oriented. I always kind of knew I did want to do something that would have that kind of applied focus. Very much feeling the responsibility of being a first-generation college student, definitely first generation to have a PhD in my family. And so to me, that was there was a sense of responsibility that came with that in terms of how I used the degree. And as I left the program, I was also a mom of a newborn. And so that completely changed things in my life. And so I needed to find something that would kind of also allow me to be a mom. So next slide. Okay, so I really kind of stumbled on some different job opportunities after I finished my doctoral program. And so some really good advice I did get from my advisor was, you know, you can actually ask people for postdocs, which I did not know. And so I definitely carved out a little list of faculty who were doing work that I thought I would be interested in, or that I could kind of benefit from being under their mentorship. Sent out emails, didn't get any responses, but what I did do in the meantime was connect with Community Coalition, and they're an organization in South Los Angeles. Their direct focus is community organizing and kind of policy work. And so at the time they needed someone who had research skills, but also some background in the child welfare field. So I was able to kind of draw on my experience from working in the child welfare field before I entered the doctoral program. And so that ended up being perfect, because through that job, I was able to apply some research skills, but also kind of get a sense of almost like the sense of the landscape in Los Angeles, kind of seeing what were some of those issues that I knew I wanted to work on, and kind of from the ground up, what were organizations speaking to, what were some of the needs from the community members themselves. And so it really kind of gave me that grounding in the work. Then I also kind of stumbled across these other opportunities. I taught a little bit at UCLA in the MSW program. I also did a consultant job with an evaluation firm, Harder and Company. And so I kind of had this hybrid career at that point, which was stressful because I would say that my income was not stable. But there are some things, if you see at the top of the slide, that I feel like it allowed me to do. So that flexibility gave me time to co-author a book, which was awesome, based on my dissertation research. Again, it kind of gave me that flexibility needed to care for my family, building those community ties, and then meeting other community-based researchers. And so I'm grateful for that time, because it definitely kind of led me to where I ultimately landed. I know you can now advance to the next slide, which is the Psychology Applied Research Center at LMU. And so this is one of the people who I reached out to for a postdoc I met through my work at Community Coalition, because she had a research center, and her research center kind of served as the evaluators and researchers for many, many community-based organizations in Los Angeles. And so I reached out to her. I was able to get a postdoc there. Again, it directly tied to my background in child welfare, so that was a direct fit right there. But what we do at Park, it's an applied research center. It's directly connected to local policy, state policy, county directives, organizational planning. It's very, very community driven. So every project we work on is based on a particular need or focus that a community organization has brought to us and said, you know, we want to partner with you on this area. You know, we want to go up for a grant. Would you like to be our evaluator on this? And so our everything we work on is kind of driven by what a community organization might need. I've highlighted on the right just some of the kind of projects that we work on. We have a lot of different projects. The ones in purple are the ones that I'm kind of directly tied to, although it is highly, highly collaborative. So even though you're kind of assigned to certain projects, everyone pitches in as needed. So a few of the projects that I can speak to that I work on, the first would be the California Reducing Disparities Project. This is a statewide project where 35 groups across the state are implementing community-based mental health programs. So it's community driven, they're designed by community members, they've been proven to be effective within their own communities, and it's a statewide evaluation to determine, are these types of approaches to mental health, are they viable strategies for reducing mental health disparities? And so we're a statewide evaluator for kind of this multi-site initiative. And so I'm a project manager for that. I also work on a local project here in Los Angeles County, which is doing something similar, but it's within the field of juvenile probation. So it's community groups, almost 50 community groups across LA County who are doing innovative approaches to serving youth who get involved with the criminal justice system and who typically don't get funding from the probation department, but are having these very unique, impactful programs. And so we serve as a kind of a cross-site evaluator on that. And then I also work on some of our kind of smaller projects, one being an initiative of mental health service providers in South LA who have kind of come together to form a system of care for family members, relative caregivers, young moms, families with very young children in South LA, and kind of doing a wraparound program for them and giving them the support that they need for their kids to thrive. So that is just a small intro into some of the work that we do at the center. And if you go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit about what that might look like on a day-to-day. So in one day, I could be doing all of these things that are on the screen, or I could be doing just one of these activities. But for instance, I think my time is running up. I'll go really, really quickly. It can involve everything from qualitative coding of focus groups and interviews or reports to kind of understand outcomes. We're a training center, so we have research assistants who want to go on to get their doctoral degrees. We also have recent postdocs who want to go for a tenure track position, and they're kind of in the postdoc to get some more training, so it's a lot of mentoring and training on them. We do presentations for stakeholders, and that's everything from relative caregivers in South LA who participated in a focus group and want to know what some of the findings were, to researchers for other organizations on some of the work that we're doing. And then it is a lot of meeting with community stakeholders, getting feedback. Maybe we designed a survey and now we need to know from the community groups, does this work? Is this really getting at what you all are trying to measure, and kind of doing some back and forth there. So that's a somewhat typical day in our lab. You can go to the next slide. I'll try to wrap it up. And I just did want to share that, again, kind of looking at some of those pros and cons of working in an applied field. I think in the beginning, I was doing this work on a consultant basis, which, as I mentioned, gave me that flexibility that was awesome. But also, as my family started growing and my needs started changing, I did need something more stable. So I'm glad that I was able to kind of find that through the research center that I'm at. And so I think also being a mom, for me, I do work for two women who are also mothers, and that's been invaluable because when I need to stop in the middle of a meeting to go pump, they are totally supportive of that. And for me, I know I needed that. So I definitely have found a community of support there. And you can go on to the next slide. And I just will point out that, with doing kind of this applied research work, you do have to be clear about the pros and the cons. And sometimes the pros are the cons. So, doing community-based research is awesome because it's applied. You know that what you did directly led to funding for an organization. It helped push a policy agenda for a local organization. So that's great, but it is extremely fast-paced. Sometimes it feels like there's not a moment to stop. You're kind of dependent on community timelines, you're dependent on grant timelines, and that can be kind of difficult to navigate at times. Funding is sometimes, it can be short-term. You might get a year-long contract for something, and so there's that feeling of kind of needing to fund your position in that way. You can use all of your traditional research skill sets, which is awesome, everything you learned. And sometimes it almost goes out the door because what you learned does not apply to when you're doing really, really applied work where you have to be willing to be creative. Like, here's what I know, now how can I apply this to a situation that looks totally different from what I read about, in that journal article. And you can go to the last slide, I believe it is. Just that there is constant learning. I am constantly learning from the community members who we work with, from the external consultants who we work with. And I think with any position, there's gonna kind of be that constant learning, but I am kind of understanding that the community in this case is the guide. And so recognizing that community wisdom and understanding the impact of a project is what did it mean for them. And that's kind of always gonna be the priority in the work that we're doing. And so I will stop there and hopefully answer questions later. Hand it over to the next speaker, Matthew.
Hi, thank you, Diane. And thanks everybody so far. You can go to the next slide. Back one, thank you. So again, my name is Matthew Mizel. I am an associate policy researcher at RAND. RAND is a research institute And similar to what Diane was describing, we do a lot of applied work. So next slide. So I'm going to tell you all a bit about RAND and my job there, to kind of give you information on what a non-academic institution and job looks like. So RAND is headquartered in Santa Monica. That building you see in that picture that looks like a fish, that is our building. I'm actually sitting in it right now because I don't have working internet at home. And you can see we are a block from the ocean, but don't let that fool you. About once every 6 months, I walk down to the ocean in the middle of the workday pre-COVID. But we have 9 offices worldwide. I've traveled to several of the other ones in the US. There are over 2,000 employees at RAND, and a little over half of them have a PhD. And our work gets divided or can be categorized into a couple of broad areas. I do a lot of work in social economic well-being. I've done some work in healthcare and education and labor. RAND also has a very large defense and homeland security areas where I do not work in, but that's also part of how RAND is more commonly known. But what's important to note is there's really a big diversity of what we do. So next slide. So the mission of RAND is to help improve policy and decision-making through research and analysis. And what that means is our work is less theoretical and is really about directly impacting what's on the ground. And there's 2 core values that guide a lot of what we do, and that is quality and objectivity. Quality comes through in a number of ways. There's a very high standard that we have to keep with the work we do, and there's a large amount of internal review that happens on any work that goes out the door. Objectivity, while a debatable concept that I have debated with people here, I think the key point behind it is that we strive for objectivity, and we strive to do work that's based on scientific research and is rigorous. So next slide. There is, as I was starting to say before, a huge variety of people who work at RAND. And you can see from this pie chart just the great diversity in training and background that people have. And this becomes a tremendous resource. So when we work in projects, we work on teams, and those teams are transdisciplinary. And so I'm able to draw upon people with expertise in a large number of areas for projects that I'm leading, and people then look to me on projects that they're working on in areas that I can complement what they offer. Next slide, please. And so for better or for worse, this gives a little picture of the workforce at RAND, and looking at the race and ethnic diversity. As you can see, to some extent there is diversity, but there is certainly further to go to both reflect the diversity in the country and the diversity in the state of California, where I am based. But RAND has engaged in a number of efforts in recent years to try and address this. And most recently, in the last month, just launched a Center for the Advancement of Racial Equity Policy. But on the positive, you can see, looking at gender, we're split pretty evenly. And there are a ton of women and women of color as well that I work with. And in fact, where my research tends to be housed, the leadership is the 3 researchers who guide the area that I primarily work in are people of color, and 2 of which are women of color. And you can see from the birth year that RAND is a place where some people come to work for life. And while we don't offer tenure, it is a place where one can spend one's entire career. And that may or may not be important to you as you consider your path. So next slide. So RAND is primarily soft funding. And what that means is, unlike a university, we continually have to work on any project, we have to go get funding for that project. And there's a wide variety of places where that funding comes from. I've worked on projects that are funded through NIH. I'm currently working on an NSF grant as well. I've worked on projects that are funded by federal government, by the state governments, by foundations. There's some internal funding available that I've received for work. And so there's a wide variety of ways that RAND researchers pay for the work. And what that also means, though, is it's continually something that we have to work on, which I'll touch on a bit more later. Next slide. So I want to tell you a bit more about my work, and in order to give a little picture of what one can do outside of academia. So my research falls into two big buckets. One is research on racial equity, and I do research on racial equity within the criminal legal system and the civil legal system, as well as looking at healthcare and education. So I'm able to really touch on a variety of different areas, and that's included projects that are directly related to policing. I'm working on a project with the LA Sheriff's Department right now, and potential impact on racial equity in that arena, for example. And then similarly, there's another bucket called the criminal justice system. And within that, I work on projects on policing, on prosecution in the courts, and research on criminal desistance and reentry. Criminal desistance is the process through which people stop committing crime. Reentry is returning from incarceration. And diversion. Diversion are programs that are designed to divert people from the courts and into non-incarceration pathways once they become involved in the criminal justice system. And what's interesting about this work is that oftentimes we are hired by specific government entities. So for example, I'm working on a project with the District Attorney's Office of New York right now to evaluate the diversion program they have, whether it's effective or not at reducing people who are involved in the justice system, potential impact on racial disparities, potential impact on people's outcomes. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little about what a career trajectory is like here, and particularly relative to what it's like in an academic setting. So our currency is still the same as it would be if you work in a university, which is dissemination is still key. But one difference is universities primarily evaluate one's success in research by journal articles and the impact of your journal articles and how much they reach. And journal articles is certainly one way where we're looked at, but we also create something that's called RAM reports, in which we put information out into the world, which are still rigorously reviewed. We do a lot of direct reports to the entities that hire us. And that is an important part of how we're evaluated as well. And dissemination is also looked at through congressional testimony, through media, and through a variety of ways that are a little more inclusive than strictly a journal article. Secondly, impact is really important. So if you can show that your work has changed or moved forward a policy on a federal, state, or local level, that's really valued and important here. And for me as someone, it was important for me that my work have a direct, tangible impact on the world. And it really is a very valued aspect of what's done here. And then finally, we do have an internal promotion process that maps similarly to what happens at an academic university. And researchers are categorized basically as associate, full, or senior researchers. And as you progress, as your work becomes more advanced, as you increase your dissemination, your impact, you're able to move through those levels, and as your leadership position moves in projects. And so while it's different than being in an academic setting, it gives you a little bit of a framework to understand that we still kind of go through a similar process of doing our jobs. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I love about my job, which, as you can see, is actually a lot. I love very much where I work. And I've been at RAND a little over 2 years. First and foremost, I have amazing colleagues. I mentioned a bit about the wide variety of trainings I have. There are so many incredibly intelligent, thoughtful, and knowledgeable people here in a variety of ways, and it never ceases to be stimulating or interesting. We get to work in teams, which I love. It is very much how we do work here. It's very rare that a project is individually done. And I enjoy collaborating. I enjoy learning from the people I work with. And invariably, whenever I have something I have a question on or uncertain about, there is somebody here who's an expert in it and knows about it. It's a very collaborative, supportive environment. There is a shocking lack of egos here, given that 53% of the people have PhDs. people are supportive and mentoring of one another, like to see other people succeed, not competitive, and really wonderful to each other. I get to work on a variety of projects. I have projects right now, as I mentioned, Sheriff's Department project. I have a project on police militarization. I have a project on racial bias in civil jury decision-making. I have a project on an intervention for treating or preventing HIV. I have a project, and a lot of these, by the way, I'm not the lead on, but projects I get to participate on. Some I am the lead on. And I have a project looking at racial disparities in patient experience in healthcare. And so, just to name a few, I have another project on legal decision-making. So what else I love, our work has a lot of impact. It directly impacts the world and policy and decision makers. We get to explore the interests we have. No one tells me what I get to do. I choose to participate in projects or not. Work is all transdisciplinary. Again, we work with people in different areas, and it's all research all the time. So I get to focus on research without any outside distractions or any obligations. Next slide, please. And finally, a couple things that could be better about where I work. I do miss teaching. We have a small graduate school that'll potentially be teaching a course in, not in this coming year, but the year after. And I am a little sad not to be teaching. And then, as I mentioned before, it's soft money. So we're continually out looking for funding, putting in proposals, and that can be a little bit stressful. I find it interesting. It helps make me think through ideas a bit more, but it's not necessarily for everybody. So final slide coming up. And if you want to contact me or talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to do so. You can reach me in any of these ways. And thank you very much for your time, and good luck with your job search process.
I'll take it over from here. This is, I guess we get to get this as the entrepreneurial portion of the talk, so it may not be relevant to you personally, but I hope you'll find it interesting. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start by noting that I'm trying to compress a story that I've told many times and at great lengths into just a few minutes, so please bear with me. I do want to say that you'll hear me use the terms gay and lesbian and gay liberation frequently, which I recognize is limited and outdated considering the depth and diversity of LGBTQ communities, but I use these terms in keeping with how the subject of my research and his peers viewed the movement he was covering during the times in which he lived. This is an endeavor that stretches back more than 8 years for me, and it's certainly taken me places that I wasn't expecting when I started my doctoral program back in 2010. If you told me 10 years ago that I would finish my PhD and go immediately into researching and writing the biography of a famous journalist and an agent of social change, I'd say it was as good a possibility as any. But no, it wasn't specifically on my list of career aspirations. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me. I finished my PhD in social work from the University of Minnesota in 2015. I earned my MSW in 2003, and before that, a BA in English in 1999 from Michigan State University. My background is as a writer, researcher, educator, and activist going back to the 1990s, when I founded the first LGBTQ student literary magazine at Michigan State. Went on to work in community-based HIV services for 10 years before going back for my PhD, and that work included coordinating outreach and testing, social and educational programs, policy advocacy, volunteer management, fundraising, and professional grant writing. Next slide, please. So this is the central character of my work. So meet Randy Schultz. By the end of the 1980s, Randy Schultz was practically a household name. He was the first openly gay journalist to cover gay issues for a major daily newspaper and produced 3 groundbreaking accounts of 20th century historical events. The first was The Mayor of Castro Street, which chronicled the life, assassination, and political legacy of Harvey Milk. And The Band Played On detailed the failed early years of America's response to the AIDS epidemic. And Conduct Unbecoming, his final work, was a comprehensive history of the US military's treatment of its gay and lesbian service members, His last two books were New York Times bestsellers, and the Band Played On was made into an HBO television docudrama. At the peak of his fame, Randy Shilts was the most widely read gay author in America. He appeared prominently in national publications including People, Mother Jones, Esquire, and Rolling Stone. On the lecture circuit, he spoke to audiences around the country while appearing on television shows such as Good Morning America and 60 Minutes. His AIDS-related death in 1994 made national headlines, meriting a congressional resolution in his honor introduced by Nancy Pelosi, condolences from President Bill Clinton, and a picket of his funeral by the Reverend Fred Phelps of the Westboro Baptist Church. Next slide, please. So the timeline I've included here is to give you a sense of how this project evolved over time, as well as how the work overlapped with finishing my PhD. My inspiration for the project dates back to 2012, when I was researching the history of nascent gay and lesbian community services, which were only a few years old when a startling number of gay men began to grow sick and mysteriously die. Reviewing news articles from the 1970s, I found a steady stream of coverage on health concerns dating back almost from the days of Stonewall itself, and some of those most in-depth articles I found were written by Randy Shilts, who at the time was a young freelance reporter. I was struck by Randy's clairvoyance in unearthing the social disease of HIV and AIDS 5 years before its full impact would be seen. Sitting in a library reading room, I thought, I wonder what Randy's biography says about this. Surprisingly, I couldn't find one. And even after learning of an academic biography that was in development, I quickly realized that my own interests were substantially different from other researchers. As I kept working on my exams and dissertation, I decided to focus on a story that no one had ever fully explored: how the developmental milestones, intimate relationships, and professional influences that shaped Randy Shilts' growth and maturation intersected with the history-making rise of gay liberation to make him one of his generation's most successful and controversial authors. To that end, I decided that once I graduated, it would be more advantageous for me to keep working as an adjunct professor with professional grant writing as a side hustle, rather than take a full-time job in either academia or the nonprofit world. My archival research has included visits to various special collections and extensive travel to San Francisco, where I've examined Randy's personal papers. I've also made use of a small number of digital and microfilm collections. The oral history portion of my research brings Randy's story to life through the memories of those who knew him best. To date, I've completed interviews with 63 individuals, including family, friends, intimate partners, political activists, colleagues, critics, and sources for his original stories. I'll add here that having a PhD has most certainly opened doors for me. Interview participants have been very receptive to speaking with me, and having a social work background has offered me the trust of numerous individuals who've shared deeply held reflections and feelings and offered to assist me with furthering the research. Securing literary representation in 2017 has also proven valuable, as it adds an imprint of credibility to the project with publishers, high-profile sources, and members of the media. Next slide, please. So my book, When the Band Played On, centers Randy's accomplishment around 4 distinct yet interrelated topics. The questions I developed to organize the research are: first, what formative experiences led Randy Shilts to become a trailblazing figure in both gay liberation and investigative journalism? Second, what do Randy's closest friends, family, and associates remember about his character? Third, how did Randy cope with the pressures of investigating, writing, and defending And the Band Played On, which made him a best-selling author and controversial celebrity? Fourth, how did Randy cope with his HIV diagnosis, declining health, and the prospect of dying from the disease that made him famous? Next slide, please. So I feel that it's important to share how a social work perspective has informed the research and writing of this biography. From the beginning, I wanted to write a book that would have the following emphasis. First, recognizing change agents. In this instance, how Randy used his position as a journalist to amplify the voices of medical providers, public health researchers, patients, and activists who were trying desperately to get the public to take this terrifying new disease seriously. Sounds familiar and a little relevant. Bear that in mind. Second, stages of development. Recognizing that Randy's actions and perspectives were influenced by all stages of his life that had preceded it. Third, person and environment, which as we in social work understand, a person cannot be understood in a vacuum. The context of Randy's life adds crucial details to the story and gives us a stronger sense of how his own capabilities intersected with a number of historic events. Fourth, it is trauma informed. At every stage of his life, Randy was forced to cope with adversity that ultimately shaped the way he wrote, the way he worked, and the way his legacy is viewed today. And finally, empathy and compassion. Rather than distancing myself from the more complex emotional elements of the story, I've tried to move closer both to better understand the world as Randy saw it and to feel how others must have experienced him as well. Next slide, please. So what's left? Right now, to finish the writing is the major step. I just started work on chapter 13 of 16, continuing to add sources as I needed. At this stage, there's really only a small number of people who it would be nice to have included in this story, but it would still get written whether they agree to be interviewed or not. Working to secure a publisher. My agent has done a lot of due diligence and has gotten it in the hands of some very, I would say, influential publishing houses, and it's gotten good feedback. It's more in a sort of a waiting stage right now to try to find out where is really the best fit for it and where is it going to find a home. And finally, to spread the word and tell the story. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to refer back to the excellent advice that you've been given by the other panelists today. If you have a big idea, I'll add, that doesn't fit with the traditional job market, you can develop the resources and skills to create your own pathway. And what I found in my experience was from Liz Lightfoot and my advisor, Jean Quam, and others within our program, as soon as I really locked into this is where I wanted to go and where my passion lay, I had nothing but support within my doctoral program. And I found that resources became available for me. The calling card of having a PhD helped immensely. And I've just established some incredible relationships along the way with people who wanted to be part of this, wanted to share their story, and see Randy's story really give him the voice that it deserves. So I've included my email address here. If you are one of those people who is feeling like you've got that big idea and wants to figure out how to sort of take that entrepreneurial path on your own, by all means, reach out to me and I'm happy to assist you in any way that I can. If we go to the next slide, these are just the photo credits for my presentation. I thank you all for your time today, and if any of you have questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists who offered a really nice view and a broad view of various research positions and careers outside the tenure track. So some questions came in and I've grouped them as a quick qualitative researcher into a few themes. They are right now how to prepare for these positions while you're in school. Then we have getting the jobs, negotiating the jobs, and doing the work. So let's kind of go from the beginning. So we had a few questions that cluster together, and they are about prepping. So for example, I want to pursue a career in policy practice. How do you pursue this path? I want exposure to opportunities while I'm in my PhD. So in other words, could any of you, well, let's start with Diane, because you talked about a bit about how you prepped yourself for a non-tenure track job during your PhD program. So let's start there, and then I'll open it up to the other panelists. What are the things that you did to prep yourself to get this type of job during your PhD program?
I think, although it was not intentional, I think it was taking advantage of RA positions that were maybe not directly tied, that were tied to community-based work. So it was two projects in particular that I can think of that were doing work in the field that I was interested in, which had to, was dealing with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated youth. So working on both research and then also evaluation projects for those organizations gave me, for one, kind of those direct ties to those community organizations, but also gave me insights on, you know, what type of research help or support do organizations need? And so then I was able to kind of build on that and keep that in mind as I was looking for jobs as I was graduating.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Matthew, Kelly, yeah.
This is Kelly, and I will hop in. A couple of pieces of advice or things that might be relevant to folks would be is there are lots of groups and associations that you can be a part of, both on your own campus or in the sort of national sector. And what I'd really suggest, or sort of one of the strategies that I've used as well as advise others, is pick, you know, 1, 2, or 3 things that are really connected to what you're passionate about. For me in particular, again, it was the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, which was the association that represented our UCEDs and our LEND programs. But I also was very actively involved with the Association of People Supporting Employment First. That's another national group focused on inclusive employment for people with disabilities. And there were a couple other groups that I've leaned in and out of along the way. And having a connection to some of those national networks of the researchers, the advocates, the professionals that are working in that field can be very, very valuable. And don't hesitate to reach out, send an email, go to their conferences, attend a few webinars, and find some common names that you see popping up to build that kind of network connection. Again, conferences used to be a great place to connect with people. I'm not sure what that might look like for all of us in the future, but attending events like this and kind of making those connections, but also just recognizing you don't have to do all of them. Pick a couple that really resonate with the things that you're passionate about or interested in.
Great. And then there's also a particular question. I don't know if anyone can speak to this in terms of prepping yourself, again, on that theme. If your university does not have a lot of opportunities to do community engaged research, what steps might you recommend maybe outside the university to get that experience, if anyone can speak to that?
This is Kelly, and maybe one of the other observations I have are looking at potential partnerships or projects within state or local agencies. A lot of times, depending on the culture and climate within an individual state, there can be evaluation jobs, there can be policy jobs, there can be special projects that states or counties have. I think Matthew had you had acknowledged some of the work that you're doing with a specific state in New York and with Los Angeles County. Sometimes there are things like that that are almost hiding in plain sight. In the sense of that sometimes there can be jobs in those spaces that can give you research, evaluation, or community experience without being tied to, say, a big research center like RAND or a big university center. So sometimes jobs in those spaces are good starting places as well.
Michael, do you have any advice here?
Well, I feel like this is where my experience as a grant writer helps out a bit, because there are opportunities independently to be able to work with organizations, particularly in the community-based world, who may benefit from your experience if you've done any work on research or grant writing proposals, where you can help them to build their own capacity and build some of those partnerships with academic institutions, medical and other social service institutions, colleges and universities. Well, it's very true that within higher ed, there are usually professional grant writers on staff. A lot of times in the nonprofit world, they don't have those resources or they outsource them. And you can work yourself into a position to be able to assist in multiple ways, including with the writing of the grants, to help them to be able to do community-based research. So I think that that can be a helpful add-on or something to include in your portfolio to work with community partners.
Thank you. What I'm hearing is for folks who want to get to prep themselves for this type of experience is to exercise multiple social networks that you might have from your practice experience in the community and through potentially, we didn't mention, consulting with the field instructors at your university if your tenure track faculty can't help you make those connections, sometimes the field education faculty can, to do evaluations or other types of experiences. The next kind of chunk of questions has to do with getting the jobs. So most, a lot of you talked about, okay, then I got this job, but folks wanted to know how you got the job, where you looked for alternative careers like websites, preparing a CV, and for interviews in these positions. So yeah, like what's the difference in terms of the interviewing and the CVs and the process? And since Matthew, I know you also interviewed for assistant professor positions at the same time, maybe you could start by speaking to some of the differences here.
Sure. So for me, I had a very open job search process. I was like, let me see what's out there. And I was very interested in academia. I was interested in places like RAND as well. I'd even looked at some policy positions at community and governmental organizations. I kind of wanted to take it all in and see what the opportunities were. So I think so when I'm talking about research jobs, whether it's at a research institute, like places that I'm working at, or if you're at an academic place, it's some similar where you're doing research as a grad student, you're building up your methodological skills, you're working to get funding for your work, working to get publications, and kind of beginning to lay the foundation for all that. And then it is really, with every place you apply, tailoring your application and your interview process, if you have one, to that place. And that's doing the legwork of what is important to that institution, what are they looking for, both generally as a research mandate, what are they looking for specifically in that position, and doing that legwork to find out. And then one of the things that's always really, really helpful, regardless of the field, is if you have some sort of relationship to the place. So if you can have worked there before, if you can know people in common, that really helps out the process a lot. And that's, for me, that was part of what helped me with RAND, is I had worked here before during the summers when I was a grad student. So I knew the place, they knew me, and that really gave me a big leg up in the process.
This is Kelly, and I would also agree with.
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm on the phone, so I can't see if other folks are talking, so I apologize if I'm interrupting. This is Kelly, and I agree with Matthew of that in preparing your application and preparing for an interview, knowing the organization that you're working for and what's important to them, what's in their portfolio, and really being able and being prepared to have a conversation about reciprocity. What are you bringing as an applicant, as a researcher, as a postdoc, and what they are also offering you. I think being able to show capacity for growth is really, really, really important and valuable right now. Is that certainly in my roles over the last couple of years, I've seen lots of applicants come in for all kinds of jobs. And some people want things very neatly carved out of this is what I'm going to do, but being, again, kind of flexible in thought and spirit on these are the kinds of projects you might be working on. These are the things, and being able to share the things that you're interested and passionate about, but also showing that kind of, I mentioned this earlier, that kind of curiosity and willingness to learn other things. Because similar to Matthew's path at RAND, in the centers that I've worked in, we're soft money funded. So oftentimes, not oftentimes, all the time, we're pursuing those opportunities. So if money is in the area of disability employment policy, if our money is in juvenile justice for youth with disabilities, or things like that, of being able to show that you can pivot into a variety of different types of things can be really, really valuable. And if you have good methods, if you have good people skills, if you have some solid experiences, those can be really valuable. And I'd also, again, reiterate what we were talking about kind of how do you prepare, is that many people get jobs and have opportunities because of the people they know and they're connected to. So maybe it's somebody you met at a conference, maybe it's a place you worked in the past, Maybe it's somebody else in a different part of your university. And so really being mindful of those professional relationships, and know that while you might not tap into them immediately now as a first or second year PhD student, still working on forming them today can pay dividends in the future when you're a fourth year or fifth year student or getting ready to finish your degree.
Diane and then Michael, how did you prepare a CV and cover letter and interviews for the jobs that you've been able to obtain, or the work you've been able to do since your graduation?
I may not be the best one for that question, because I guess similar to what Kelly was just saying, you know, my job connections kind of came through other people, and it was really just interviewing for those positions and talking about my interests, both and what I thought I could bring in terms of a skill set. So I did not have a traditional CV prep process, but I did just want to add, kind of going back to the last question, which is that don't discount the regular preparation that you would do for a tenure track position. One thing I did not do in my PhD program, to be quite honest, was attending the conferences and kind of building that network. And it's something that I feel like I'm actually trying to rebuild now, which is kind of having a community of researchers around me. I didn't take the time to do that in my doctoral program. And I do think tapping into those networks is what can help kind of land you with the job, or to hear about different opportunities. So I'll throw it to Matthew on the CV prep.
Or Michael, yeah.
I think my response is actually pretty similar to Diane's. I also, my conference experience was a bit limited. However, I will say, just sort of throwing it out there, our research practicum class with Liz back in our doctoral program was so excellent for putting together a CV that it has continued to help, and I continue to use that template. And I've continued to update it as I would as an academic. I also include all of my grant awards on it. And I think that actually helps because money talks. But my CV looks very much like a traditional CV. And it's certainly opened doors for me when I've shared it with potential research sources and things like that. So I would say whatever you've got that is still feeding into that from your own doctoral program, that's a really good template to continue using. And you know, I think that the people who have been your mentors can continue to provide consultation on that as well. If you need to alter it in some way to sort of meet a particular job market, I'd look for experts in that market, or people who've gotten the jobs that you're hoping to get, and have them run it by you. Not too long ago, I actually had that experience with a fellow adjunct professor who had a very traditional looking resume and wasn't getting academic jobs. And when I shared my CV with her and showed her how to break down every single thing she did, she actually had pages and pages of accomplishment that her potential academic employers were not seeing. So there are some differences to consider with that, and find people who can help you with that in the area where you want that specific kind of help.
Okay, thank you so much. To summarize a little bit, what I've heard is to be flexible, to build your CV as you would. And I know from advising Diane and Matthew and others, also having different types of CVs and cover letters available can help you, right? So you might have a CV and a cover letter template that you use for a community-based research position that looks somewhat similar to an academic position, but you have those available. And seek advice from your mentors, and your doctoral program chairs can also help you. So I have a series of questions here in terms of, so we talked about prep, we talked about getting the jobs, and it's good we have 15 minutes left. So this is kind of a brief series of questions. Can you negotiate like in a non-tenure track position, can you negotiate your general salary and benefit packages like you do at universities? And also, what are some strategies for negotiating for what you need in terms of family time, working at home? Yeah, so this might be a good question for Matthew and Kelly at this time who are working at, and Diane potentially at full-time research soft money institutions. Kelly, do you want?
This is Kelly, and I can share Yep, I'll share a couple comments on that. Generally speaking, similar to the slide that Matthew had shared about kind of the different job types or sort of the trajectories within a university setting, even if it's, or a research centered setting. For us, both at the University of Minnesota and at the University of New Hampshire, there are often salary ranges posted, and there can be salary ranges for an individual center, an individual college, and the university itself for that same type of employee. So whether you're working in, you know, say the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, or say you have the same type of research role for their oceans research center that they have on campus. So while there is a little bit of flexibility, oftentimes those ranges are posted. And if you can ask what the range is, that's often good. And sometimes the more specific you can ask what that range is even more helpful, because the university might say the job is between $80,000 and $120,000 a year. But the reality is most people only enter at the lower end of that. So asking some of those questions and being okay with that, I would generally say most times, most entities are comfortable with being able to answer those range questions. I think always being willing to do some level of negotiation. I know that because many universities are in extremely difficult financial positions right now, being in soft money, we're slightly more protected, if you will, because we have other sources of income other than student revenue. That said is, we have to be really mindful about what the financial future looks like. And so sometimes finding openings or having openings approved can be a little bit trickier. That's why using your networks and using people you know, or using your field placement coordinators within your universities can be really, really valuable tools. But you also should not be afraid to negotiate a little bit. And I would say it's a bit of an art and it's a bit of a science as well, because on one hand, it's very reasonable to counter offer if you have an offer on the table. At the same time, one of the things that can be I personally found this very difficult when I entered a university setting, is that I had more than 10 years of direct practice experience. And when I re-entered a university setting as a professional, it was almost like starting over. Salary-wise, and you sort of had to work your way back up. So sometimes I have often encountered early career professionals or early grads who are like, I have a PhD, I have these credentials, I want this higher level salary, this is what I went back to school to do. And that isn't necessarily how I have always seen it work, or the way that universities have always let it work, that you still, even though you have that higher level credential, there is some working up. So also being open to talking to a potential employer about what are the career pathways, to say, okay, if I come in at a researcher 6 now, you know, how long until I may be eligible for a researcher 7 or something, or a research manager or something like that. So there are some strategies that you can do in kind of prepping for that, but be okay and practice a little negotiation. And that generally is, I would say, is generally welcomed.
Thank you. How about at Rand, Matthew? And also a quick question for you as well. Are non-US citizen students with PhDs employed at Rand?
So yes, there's part of the diversity here, actually. There's some enormous number of people who are not US citizens who work here and from a variety of places.
And what about negotiating?
Negotiating, yes. Yes, always negotiate.
Okay.
If you get nothing out of today, always negotiate. And in fact, part of the reason there are racial and gender disparities in salary is because white men tend to negotiate more. And which is not to say there aren't a lot of institutional structural factors, but it is part of the reason that disparity exists. So regardless, and negotiation is figuring out what you want, and some of that is salary, some of that might be other benefits or part of a package that are available. Here, there really isn't a package. There's not startup funds like at a research university. It's just a salary, and it's even here where it's fairly structured and regimented. One can, and I did negotiate for more salary. The worst that's going to happen to you if you negotiate is they say, we don't have it. That is the worst. No one's going to hate you. No one's going to think you're ungrateful, as long as you handle it well. I mean, don't ask for double what they offered. But you might actually just get a little bit more. Thank
you. Just being mindful of the time, because we only have about 3 minutes left for Q&A. I'm gonna suggest that people who had specific questions for the panelists, I saw some for Matthew, to email Matthew directly. And because I'm trying to do a bit of general questions here. And there were some specific questions for you about RAND, Matthew. And then the last question I'm going to ask is about the type of work that you're doing at soft money centers. Is it qualitative, quantitative, both? What research skills are important to gain in terms of methodology in your PhD program? And I think you could each probably answer that quickly to give a range. So we'll start with Michael.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, what types of research skills are important to gain methodologically for this type of career?
Qualitative research, most definitely. Archival, for sure. I think in particular with the type of writing that I'm doing right now, being able to practice that empathetic neutrality that we talk about. Matthew, I liked your point earlier about sort of questioning what objectivity is. And I think that's really important when you take on a project where you're really diving in deep into some experiences that are contentious and may have some emotional challenges to them. And I think that you can skillfully navigate those with the background of a qualitative researcher, and having the historical research background too really helped to know where to look for particular sources, which archives to and collections to visit, and making use of those resources. And it certainly helps the archivist when you get in touch with them and you understand how a finding aid works, when you're able to go in and see specifically what you want out of boxes so they can get it from you easily enough. So just using those to do your homework and be able to advance your research more skillfully and knowledgeably, so you get right to the heart of the documentation you want to look at.
Great. And real quick, Diane, Kelly, Matthew, if you could just share what types of research and methods training has been most valuable to your career.
I can start. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Diane.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Diane.
Well, I would say our center hires for all kinds. It sometimes can depend on the nature of the project where there's a specific need, but I think it's whatever your skill set is, whether it's quant or qual, it's being able to sell it in terms of here's what I know, here's how I want to grow. And I think from an applied research center perspective, you're usually working with a team of experts and consultants. So, no candidate is expected to know everything. It's more of, here's what you have to offer. Okay, we can supplement in this way. So that's what you would definitely want to highlight on your CV, is just whatever your skill set is, including project management and including just being able to work with community, because that's something that we look for as well.
All right, and 30 seconds or less, Kelly.
This is Kelly, and I would ditto what Diane just said. And again, beyond the qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods, which are all very valuable, the project management, knowing how to work with people and understanding the context of either the community or the state that you're working within, as well as highlighting your ability to supervise or work with other people, can also be really valuable skills.
All right, Matthew, you have the last floor.
I'll agree with all that and add I do both qualitative and quantitative research here. And quantitatively, I'm working with there's dozens of people here with PhDs in statistics. So I'm never going to be the lead on that, but I can speak the language and I know the methodology and I know how to do that work and interact with them. And then qualitatively, I engage in qualitative field research and I work with other people in it and analyze it. So I get to do both. But I think it's really important to come out of grad school to maximize your methodological development.
So just to summarize, what I'm hearing is whatever you are good at, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods, you can sell in your pathway. And you can market that yourself as being an expert in qual, quant, or both. So that's great to hear. We have come to the end of the webinar, and I wanted to turn it back over to my friend and colleague, Liz Lightfoot, to wrap us up. So we got to almost all the questions, which is great. Thank you for
Great, thank you. And please provide feedback on the webinar on the website provided on the slide right now. And I can't thank our panelists enough. I think Laura and I and the rest of the team were expecting something that would be not quite as good as this. And so we are really, I'm feeling really great that we had such a great group of folks who could give a wide range of types of non-academic careers. And I think this probably gave our participants a sort of eye-opening to what you can do outside of the tenure track. And I appreciate their folks' honesty and their advice on how you can do a non-academic career that really fits with your research training. And I think we learned a lot about how this can be like a better fit for some people with what their passions are and what their life is like, what their interests are. So I hope folks can find like a ray of sunshine in the COVID-19 situation right now, that you're not limited to the university as a potential university tenure track job as a potential job, and that there are wonderful opportunities all over the place. I think probably most doctoral program directors are going to mandate that folks watch this video that will be online. I believe, I know for sure it will be on the GADE website and probably on the SWR website as well. So I think people will be taking advantage of this. So I wish we could all, however many folks are left, could applaud you, but I'll applaud you for, and Laura and I will applaud for the participation. And thanks again to SWR and GADE for hosting this. And I'm sure we will be hosting similar job market webinars in the future. And hopefully we'll have a more robust tenure track job market coming up soon. And then people will have many, many opportunities. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. That was so good. It was wonderful, inspiring.
Very.
Jen, do you want to stop recording?
Yes, I will do